Hi, and welcome to Thoughts of an Ignorant, a YouTube channel made by me so I can practice my English, learn some history and philosophy and other topics, and speak about the things I like, about the books I read, and about the things that interest me. If you're a person that thinks that the things I said to you are interesting and you want to know my opinion about certain topics or engage in debates with me, please feel free to stay. You are more than welcome. Today I would like to talk about what I know about ancient Greece. So ancient Greece starts in Crete, in the island of Crete, with the Minoan civilization. The Minoan civilization was a civilization based on commerce, whose rulers were aristocrats and priests. This civilization became extremely rich. It was one of, if not the most important civilization and most advanced civilization in the region. And it established a lot of economic networks and commerce trade routes in the surrounding areas. This civilization, as I said, was extremely rich, and centuries later, another civilization was born that, at least at the beginning, basically copied the Minoan civilization. This new civilization was the Mycenaean. The Mycenaean civilization, as I said, basically copied the Minoan civilization, but had a different economical structure and political structure. The political structure was a very central monarchy and some aristocrats that followed the king. And its economic structure was also commerce, like the Minoans. But the main difference was that when they couldn't get the things they wanted by commerce, they went militaristic and invaded and took the things they wanted by force. Besides the militaristic nature of the Mycenaean civilization, it also became extremely powerful and rich. But it met its demise when according to some historians, when the nobility and the king decided to planned an invasion and executed a military invasion that went extremely bad. This invasion and this failed invasion, made the nobility lose trust in the king and made the Mycenaean civilization to enter a dark period, a crisis of internal struggle between the aristocracy that weakened the Mycenaean people. This period, according to some historians, was used by some inhabitants of northern Greece, called the Dorians, to start invading and colonizing the Mycenaean region, because again, the Mycenaean culture was at a low point. The Mycenaeans had to leave the most rich and important economic centers of its culture and had to emigrate to the poorer parts of the empire. This new social and economic situation made the people from the Mycenaean civilization to adapt, and they had to change a lot of things because again they didn't have all the economic and social structures that they used to have. So a new economic and political model was born, a model based on local aristocracies, local kings that had control of a territory and that, protected the people and gave food to the people that were in need in exchange for servitude, in exchange for people's freedoms. This new model made a lot of people to become debt serfs of these new nobles. The power of these new aristocrats was based on, the military power of these new aristocrats was based on horsemanship. They basically had an elite, the nobles were an elite of war riders that had the wealth to maintain a powerful and expensive cavalry that they used to protect their interest and the interest, supposedly the interest of their serfs. This situation was maintained and was more or less stable, but it also declined. But it declined for a very interesting reason. At least I find it extremely interesting. That the reason these aristocracies declined was by the rise of the hoplite phalanx. What was the hoplite phalanx? Well, basically, again, as I previously said, those aristocracies based its military power on cavalry. But a new military unit was born, the hoplite phalanx. The hoplite phalanx was a unit based on foot soldiers that made a wall of shields and spears and coordinated themselves in an extreme efficient way. This new military unit, the hoplite phalanx, proved to be extremely successful at a point that it overshadowed the nobility horses, the nobility riders. The nobility realized that this military unit, the hoplite phalanx, as I previously said, again, was extremely powerful, and the only way they could beat it was by trying to, attack it by one side, because again, the front part of the hoplite phalanx was an extremely powerful wall of shields and spears. The nobility realized this and basically said, okay, well, if you cannot beat it, join it. And they adapted. They took this military unit that had been discovered, had been invented, and incorporated into its defense force. But this had a problem that, as I previously said, the hoplite phalanx was much more powerful than the aristocratic cavalry. So the hoplites started getting a lot of power, and they started getting a lot of power in the political area of the city, again, overshadowing the nobles. This made a lot of political and cultural changes. First, again, the nobility had to adapt. Certain things as lavish spending or nobility spending money on themselves instead of the people was extremely bad seen. Why? Because the hoplite phalanx was based on coordination, based on everyone trust everyone. Your shield not only protects you, but it also protects me that I'm on the side, and it also protects all the people behind and all the people in the sides. So this had a very important cultural impact, because again, everyone had to trust everyone. This created a very egalitarian culture, a culture based on everyone having responsibility, everyone having to care about the group, because if one single member failed, the full phalanx was in danger. So again, nobility had to adapt. Nobility had to spend money in things that benefited the whole community, because again, being selfish, spending money on yourself was extremely bad seen, was extremely disregarded in this new hoplite culture. But of course, these hoplites didn't only want some power, they wanted more, and they took more power every day. So how did the aristocracy react to this? Well, again, first, they had to adapt to these new cultural changes, but they also had to change the political system. And this diverges a lot depending on the city region, on the city that this happened. And side note, the Greeks at the time were organized in little cities. This aristocracy that had formed after the Mycenaean fall was extremely decentralized. So each Greek political center was split, there was not a central government. So each Greek city or polis in Greek reacted in a very different way to this. There are cities like Sparta that opted for a full militaristic, full tyrannical way of dealing with this new hoplite culture. They basically took a bunch of people, they made them into hoplites, and these hoplites had to be trained, these new hoplite citizens had to be trained all of their life for the war. These new citizens of Sparta had to be prepared for war and had to be prepared to fight and die for the city. But of course you cannot keep a city only with soldiers. How did they eat? Well, they ate because of the serfs. Sparta was a city based on slavery. They had a lot of slaves who made everything for the army. And this is how they lived. The army protected the city and protected the allied cities, and the serfs gave money, gave resources, gave food to this military elite. And also, of course, to maintain this, Sparta had to be tyrannical. It was a tyrannical regime that was also very unstable, surprisingly enough, because tyrannies are not very stable because the power is illegitimate. So this made the military of the city to be less aggressive, because again, if people went outside of Sparta, if they would see how other cities were far more freer than Sparta, and they maybe wanted to demand something else, like, hey, I don't want to be a serf, or hey, I don't want to be a soldier for the government for all my life. I want to have freedom. I want to decide for myself. But also was the fact that, again, because Sparta had a lot of enemies, if Sparta was weak, it would be used by its enemies to attack Sparta and destroy it. So again, very militaristic society, very tyrannical society that required all its citizens to be members of the army and to protect the city and to do severe training. Again, to maintain the interest of the aristocracy. But there also was a different approach, a completely different approach. And this approach was the one from Athens. Athens, instead of, making this big government that made people either be soldiers at full time or serfs, basically established a government that forbid all debt serfdom that the previous aristocracies had made, and give a lot of power to the hoplites, eventually leading to a very radical direct democracy that we are going to speak about on later videos. Well, so yeah, this is where the Greece that you may have heard of is born. This is where all the famous tropes about Greece come from. These independent cities that, based on the hoplites that govern the city, etc., etc., etc. And you may say, well, but why not oppress the hoplites? Why did aristocracy negotiate with them? And why even aristocracy sometimes disappeared? Why did they not attack the hoplites? Well, they could have kept an elite hoplite military that attacked its population, and some cities did that, but these had a problem. That is, the hoplite phalanx is based on numbers. The bigger, the better. So a city that had more citizens in the phalanx was, in conditions being equal, was a more powerful city. So again, oppressing people may have worked in some cases, but not always. Because again, having a weak phalanx, having a lot of enemies was not good. Again, other cities would become much more powerful and would attack you and would destroy you. Okay, so, and what about the economy? Because again, the hoplites are okay, but there were also economic changes in this period. The most important economic change was the adoption of an economy based on wine, the production of wine and the production of olive oil, instead of wheat and other, farming plants. This was because wine and olive oil have a lot of advantages. Grape and olive have a bunch of advantages when produced for the countries that produce them, especially for Greece. One of the advantages is that, well, they are more expensive to sell. Wine, it's a product for the rich. And olive oil, it's a very versatile product. It can be used for food, it can be used to maintain food, and, to keep it healthy. And it can also be used to avoid the food to be rotten. And it also can be used to make soap and to light candles. Not candles, sorry. Oil lamps. So again, it was a very expensive product to sell. It was a very profitable product. So that's why they adapted it. But also it had another advantage, that it was that the grapes and olive trees are plants that grow in very harsh environments, and Greece had a lot of those. So for the people, it was an advantage. Of course, at the beginning, it was tough because these new plants uh, had to be cultivated in a very different way to how wheat was cultivated, and also because it took time to produce plants, to produce fruits that could be sold. So again, at the beginning it was difficult to adapt, but eventually it fully adapted. It was fully incorporated into the Greek economic structure and became the norm in the region. Well, so again, everything works fine. The Greeks have the hoplites that defend the cities, that are the military order and the military power of the region, and the economy is booming. Commercial networks are established, and everything's fine. The Greek civilization we all know, the prosperous Greek civilization we all know, nothing could be wrong. Well, things could be wrong, and one of the big wrongs, one of the biggest problems that this Greek ancient civilization faced was the fact that not everyone could be a hoplite. Not everyone could be a hoplite that could contribute to the phalanx, and this created resentment. And why was that the case? Well, some people simply didn't have the land to maintain, to buy the armor and to participate in the life of a hoplite. If you're a poor person, you cannot afford to have an armor, even less to have time to participate in the military training required to be a hoplite. So poor people were not happy about this. So these poor people, instead of simply protesting, that they also did protest, they started supporting local tyrants that took power, and when they took power, they took resources from the rich hoplites and gave it to the poorer classes. These poorer classes became happy about this change, but the hoplites didn't. And also these tyrannical structures were very weak, and this weakness was used by the enemies of the Greek people to invade them. Of course, the hoplites had to do something about that, and different ways of dealing with this problem were found. One of the ways was the Spartan way. The Spartan way was based, as surprise, was based on military and force and oppression. They basically tried to overthrow all the tyrants that popped up in the surrounding areas of Sparta. But Athens took a different approach. Athens took a political approach and basically adapted. They took the poor people and told them, hey, we're going to give you political power. And they did. They give political power to the poorer classes. And okay, everything's solved. Well, no, because this power was perceived by a lot of the population, especially the hoplites, as illegitimate. Because again, these poor people, of course, now they had political power, but they were not contributing to the well-being of the whole. And this, of course, created resentment. But this changed when Athens established a powerful navy, a navy based on boats that were powered by rowers. This made the poor people, the poor classes of Athens, capable of helping the city in its military duties, because they could enter the boat, they could, be rowers, they could power the ships, and they could be valuable for the military power of the city. And so they did. And it became a point when these rowers, coordinating themselves like the hoplites in the land to, be the phalanx of the sea, became even more powerful than the hoplite phalanx of the land. And in some battles, especially against Persia, they were decisive. And again, that's how the structure was maintained, that's how the equilibrium was achieved, and that's how everyone could be part of the citizenship of Athens. Okay, so everything's solved. Congratulations, we have solved the issue. Well, not so fast. There's still another problem. If you're not poor, maybe and maybe you do have the resources to be part of the hoplite phalanx or to become a rower. But maybe you do have the resources, but you don't have the time, because certain jobs that are not seasonal, like farmers that work certain times of the year and the rest they don't. Some jobs, like for example craftsmen or traders, do not have this privilege. So these people, even though they had the resources, could never become citizens and help in any of the military or one of the main military duties of the city that was, the hoplite phalanx or the rowers of the ships. And these people, again, they had no political power, or they had very little political power compared to their colleagues, and could never become full citizens with full rights, with created resentment, but again, not a big crisis. And of course, before I finish this episode, I would like to mention that these hoplite phalanx and these rowers were all men. Women and slaves were not able to take part in the military duties of the city, and therefore could not become full right citizens, which, as you may have expected, created some uncomfort, created some regret in the women and serfdom. But this is a topic for another time. Thank you so much for being here. I hope you liked this episode, and see you soon. Bye bye.